Hello from Blue Willow Bookshop in Houston, Texas. I am Kathy Berner, and I'm the event coordinator at the shop. We are so excited to host this virtual event with KJ Charles to discuss her new book, The Nobleman's Guide to Seducing a Scoundrel. We are so grateful to KJ's publishers at Sourcebooks Casablanca for their support. I'm so excited. I am so excited for this. Please join me in welcoming KJ to the screen. How are you?
Hello, hello. Good to see you. Hello, everyone. I'm good. I'm very good. I have just come back from watching England versus Canada rugby, so I'm sort of still buzzing from that. I have a bit of a proud tradition of doing these things after rugby games, but it adds the adrenaline rush.
That is fantastic. As I was telling you backstage, and I'll tell the audience now, I loved this book so much that I built a vacation around it. The sense of place was so amazing that my husband and I spent some time in England this summer, and we went to Rye, and I stood next to a looker's hut on Romney Marsh, and it was made me so happy. And
Well,
then while I was in Rye, I read this book.
excellent, excellent. Well, it was the sense of place is a really important thing for me in both of those books. I researched them. It was just after, when lockdown was being lifted, and we went on two family trips down to Romney Marsh, when we could, and stayed there. It rained all the time. I mean, I know I talk a lot about how it rains a lot in the books, but it really did rain a lot of the time. My children still complain about it. You mentioned Dungeness, the howls of rage and protest that come up are outrageous. But I love it. I love the bleakness and I love the emptiness and the intense sense of history there. And I find it a fascinating landscape. And of course, the history that I have put in the books is accurate. And I think they're some of the books for me where the landscape and the history inform the plot so intensely. Sometimes you can read a historical novel and it's just in a setting. It takes place in a room, it takes place in a house. And it could be any room in any house, and that's fine. Then you're just doing the characters. But there's when you can actually feel the landscape informing the plot and shaping the way you write, that was a really interesting experience for me. So yeah, I love doing them. I enjoyed it immensely, and I'm glad that I came across.
So did you have the location in mind before you wrote the books, or did were you on vacation and this
No, we
idea
went
came to
there
you?
so I could research. Basically, so there's a novel by Georgette Heyer called The Unknown Ajax. I know obviously Georgette Heyer deeply problematic in many respects, but she is also, the person who invented the Regency romance. And if you're a historical romance writer who does British, Georgian, or Regency, then you're either heavily influenced by Heyer or you don't know you're heavily influenced by Heyer. But those are your two options. And the Unknown Ajax is set in actually it's set on the high land above Romney Marsh near Rye. So it's actually not far at all from Stone Manor. And one of the key elements of the plot is that there is smuggling going on. But of course, from the perspective of Georgette Heyer, who was a massive snob, the smugglers are these awful, dreadful, low class criminals. And, the aristocratic family is, they're the winners. And I love Heyer, but I take issue with her all the time. And I think the series originally sort of generated from me wanting to argue with the Unknown Ajax, which in fact that's the second book. The first book isn't that at all. But in general, historical romance is always the smugglers are always the bad guys unless one of them happens to be a duke. Otherwise, they're the bad guys. Smuggling, and especially they're smuggling information to France, and that did happen. But a lot more of it was, as in the books, it was people trying to survive because they had these trade relationships with France, which is a lot closer to Romney Marsh than London is. It's a relatively quick boat crossing rather than this dreadful land journey. And these are trading relationships that have been going on for literally thousands of years. And during the Napoleonic Wars, they just imposed a blockade and just went, no, you can't do that anymore. And nobody offered those people an alternative source of income. There was no social safety net. It was just like, oh, this trading on which you rely, heck, you can't do it because we're having a war. So I have always felt that this whole thing about smugglers are bad doesn't really take into account the nuances. And yeah, so that was a driver, and the Unknown Ajax was a driver. But the whole lot of that together made it imperative for me to set a book on Romney Marsh.
It was wonderful. Okay, and so I know that you researched there and I went there. Did you go to Ypres Castle and like look at the Smuggler Museum?
Yes, yes, yes. I've been to the Smugglers Museum, went a lot around New Romney, Dymchurch, stayed in Dymchurch. I really wanted to do more on Dungeness, which is, for people who don't know it, it's this extraordinary landscape. Now there's a nuclear power station on it. It looks like post-apocalyptic. It's this huge pebbled beach with some really weird plants that only grow there, and that's not because of the nuclear power station. That was happening before. It's a site of special scientific interest, and there's all these sort of decaying fishing boats everywhere, and the whole thing is extraordinary. Derek Jarman lived there, and he made all these artsy films there. My one regret about this duo is I didn't have an opportunity to put a scene on Dungeness because it's such a wonderful location. But it just, I couldn't work it out, basically. I couldn't make it fit.
Well,
But no,
we'll go back.
we
We're
tried.
going to go back and see it because we didn't do
You
Dungeness
should.
because we had
You
limited
should.
time.
Dungeness
But
is amazing. You're going to need a coat. It rains. It's going to rain.
I will say I was there 3 days. I had 1 day of rain, and it wasn't even a full day of rain.
Okay, well, you did pretty well.
I know we packed raincoats because you told me how much it rained.
It really does absolutely bucket down over there. You're right on the coast. And
Yeah, no, absolutely. But this especially I really felt affected in the first book by the sense of place. I mean, obviously I was inspired to travel there, but then in this one, the sense, the tension and the gothicness of it.
Yeah, I went really gothic on the second one. Well, I decided that I couldn't. I loved doing the sense of place in the first one and roaming all over Romney Marsh, but I thought I can't do that twice.
Right.
That would be a bit weird, especially because the first one, Gareth is a naturalist, an amateur naturalist of the kind, the gentleman naturalist of that period was a very big thing. And I thought, how would I? And I toyed with various options, and I eventually thought, no, we're moving to basically an indoor location. We're putting everything within this extraordinarily weird house. With castle that's been added to at all different periods. And you know what? If you're stuck in an old house with a weird family, it's going to go gothic. That's just going to happen. It's going to happen if I'm writing the book. But really, it's like being in a library with in an isolated house with a bunch of people you don't like. Somebody's going to get murdered. Some things are just inevitable. And one thing was that we were going to go seriously gothic.
I mean, you did it so well. I was so engaged, and I will say you did it well in both of them. In the first book, near the end, when Gareth is in some peril, like in case anyone hasn't read it, I don't want to totally spoil it. Uh, my husband was like, "We have to go." He was trying to get me to leave the house. I'm like, "I can't right now. Gareth is blanked to a blank, and the
Yes.
tide's coming in." And
Yes.
and he was like, "All right, fine." And he went and he sat back down and he was like, "Will you tell me when Gareth is okay?"
Lovely, fantastic. Yeah, well, okay. So another inspiration, as well as the Unknown Ajax. I don't know if you've heard of these books called Doctor Sin that were written in the 1970s. So basically, this guy Russell Thorndike wrote a novel called Doctor Sin, which is a sort of 17th century about a highwayman who turns out to be the mild mannered rector of Dymchurch, and in fact, he's a highwayman. And he does all his evil deeds, and at the end of the book, he gets killed. And it's an absolute stinker. It's honestly one of the worst books I've ever read. I reread it for this because I remembered it was set in Dymchurch, and I was looking for color and whatever. And it's shocking. It's massively racist, but it's also technically incompetent and it's crap. It's an absolute piece of crap, but huge hit, massive hit, in large part because it's sort of damn the plot, it's all full of adventure and violence and people getting tied to things and horribly murdered. So he wrote another 7, and I did mention that the hero dies at the end of the first one.
Right.
So
does he come back?
Right. So no, well, he just retcons the whole thing. So he just starts the story from the beginning and fills in everything that happens before the hero dies. But every time he does something, so he has him be the godfather of his best friend's daughter and then fall in love with her and elope with her, which is really gross. And then he obviously, that sold really well, so he has him do it again with her younger sister. I mean, these books are horrific. And it's also, one of them has one of the nastiest torture scenes I've literally ever read in my life. And I've read some grim stuff. I know, absolutely horrifying. But they're full of this intense adventure and hugely dramatic scenes. And they're still remembered, not with horror, in Dymchurch, where they have a biennial Dr. Sin festival and people dress up as, they either dress up as him with, the men are in a long coat and a tricorn hat, and the women are in like clothes with their just bosoms, almost completely everywhere. As you can imagine, there's a lot of bosoms in this book. No, it's extraordinary. So it also became necessary for me that we would have at least one scene of the Dr. Sin kind, and people being left to drown in horrific circumstances is absolutely Dr. Sin. So that was my little homage to these.
But I love that. Oh my gosh! I wonder if I can. I wonder if I can time a visit to see that festival.
I would have loved to see it. I can't. I'm baffled why people do a festival, because they are genuinely so rubbish, and only the first one is in print now. You can get a couple of print-on-demand versions of the other ones, but you shouldn't. And I really, really can't stress this enough.
Okay, we're just going to mention the title in the email that goes out. And we'll say, KJ does not recommend you purchase or read these.
No, they're massively, massively racist and incompetent.
Well, I love massively racist, technically incompetent. Wow.
Yeah, that's, I read them all because I was looking, I do find it really helps with, when you're planning a book, to read Pulp Fiction, ideally from, and if not from, then sort of set around, because you can glean an awful lot from Pulp Fiction. So I try and find related books. There's just not that much set around Romney Marsh, which is probably why they're still making a fuss about Dr. Sin. To be honest, they should switch it to a KJ Charles Festival and do the Doomsday Book.
They should, and I would absolutely go. Maybe I could be a founding patron. I'm all over it. I wanted to mention this before we started, but I'm going to say it now. The covers that Jyotirmai Patra, the art she did.
Wonderful.
I mean, the covers. Oh my gosh, they're so gorgeous.
I am really, really happy with those. I'm super happy with Sourcebooks, because one of the interesting things was we got the first draft of Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen, and they briefed it well, but I think it had swans, and it had a nice little bridge, and it had sort of a little neat Jane Austen house, and we basically went back and we went, no, it needs to look much more dangerous, and she did, and sent the picture references and everything, and she just did such an amazing job. But the publisher was great. The publisher listened, the illustrator listened. We really worked together on it to get the mood we wanted, and I was so happy with that. So all of the little details on this, they really repay studying, because everything was absolutely massively pored over. Down to the types of plants.
Yeah, no. So when we were at the Romney Marsh Nature Reserve, and I was standing next to the looker's hut, I saw a rabbit.
Oh, brilliant!
And just about lost my mind. I was just like, oh! I did not see any beetles. I don't think I saw a heron. I certainly didn't see any snakes or foxes, but I saw a rabbit. So I considered that well done.
There will have been foxes around somewhere, I can assure you. I have foxes in my garden, so they're all over the shop here.
Yeah, I was crashing around, so they were probably like, we do not need to be near that woman in an eggplant raincoat. No, thank you. So talking about your research, and on a side note, there's so many details that you share with us, and you share them so seamlessly. So you're showing me, you're not telling me. And how do you, so can you talk a little bit about your research project? And you must have had to winnow things down. And how did that all work?
It's yeah, I'm lucky in that I read very fast. So what I will tend to do is read a huge amount and skim through and pick up the little details and the bits that, there'll always be something that leaps out and clicks. And I make a lot of notes as I'm reading and pick up the things that you can sort of gently drop in. Yeah, ideally it's what do you call it? You want the one part to stand for the whole. You don't want to give a list of 37 beetles that live on Romney Marsh, but you do
Right.
want to be very detailed about this one beetle, and that makes people think you know about an awful lot of beetles, kind of thing. So part of the trick is, giving the impression of a huge hinterland of information, which I don't even need to share with you,
Right.
kind of thing. I mean, a sort of example. It's not exactly how it worked for these ones, but when I was writing the third Will Darling adventure book, that's got a climax. It's set in the 1920s, and it's got a climax on a steam yacht. And basically there's a big fight on a steam yacht, and I did an incredible amount of research. I got a found a like a floor plan, whatever you call it, for a ship. Found a floor plan, got loads of pictures. My brother-in-law is a sailor, so I basically went, you have to explain to me how these boats work and like which way they go, and what's the deck made of. And I ingested all of this information. Very little of it comes out on the page,
Right.
because that would be really boring. But I briefly knew enough about the subject that I could write about it without putting the information on the page, because the information was on my head, and therefore it comes across like I know it. And I think that's basically the trick. You've got to have the information in the back of your mind, not the front of your fingers. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Yeah, and I'm quite pleased with that. That's quite good. I just thought of that. But that's it. It's if you're trying to say, if you're trying to show something just by plonking the detail right there, it's plonked. So it's got to be digested and
right.
worked through.
No, but you do it exceptionally well.
I read really fast, and it really helps.
Well,
So I
you're also digesting it and then you're providing it in an engaging manner that doesn't make me feel like I'm sitting in a boring lecture hall.
Yeah, well, that's it. I hate boring lecture halls. I was not good at academia, but I like things that interest me. So generally speaking, the world is a really interesting place. So whatever I do, you take a deep dive into something, it's always interesting. And then you just have to sort of communicate that. When the subject springs to life for me, then it'll come alive for the reader.
Yes, but
So
not all writers do that.
yeah, I mean,
No, I read a lot of books. Not all writers do it. You do it really well.
no, thank you. I do think it helps me full time. It helps to have a lot of time. It helps to have the access to books. I've got an awful lot. Just that's just a few of my research books. Those are the ones I need to keep to hand. Um,
Wow.
yeah, so I have a lot of books.
Right. But
Um,
still, it's just it makes the stories even more engaging.
yeah. Ingest the information, digest the information, then write the information. Basically, that's
Yeah,
got to be the order. And
absolutely.
if you are trying, because I write 3 books a year, and people who are writing 6 books a year are going to struggle with getting that, because it does actually take time. And that's not a diss of people who write 6 books a year. I'd love to be able to write 6 books a year, but the different pacing has different effects, basically. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. Courtney, your agent, just threw into the chat that she found a previous copy of the cover that had swans and sheep.
I remember it because it also had blossom, if I recall, Courtney. And it was basically there's white swans, white sheep, and white blossom. And I was just like, this is really sweet and it's really beautiful. Take it away! This isn't sweet and beautiful.
And I will say to everybody, we're not going to spoil anything for Nobleman's if you haven't read it, but um the the Gothic and that hideous family.
Ah, yes. I
I
had
mean,
a lot of fun.
I could look, I mean, I could tell you were like going full Gothic with it. And as it's I mean, those of y'all who have seen me do virtual visits before know how engrossed I get in a book and know how concerned I get for people. I was very, very concerned.
Yes, well, it's
And it made me want to, I mean, I was just like, ugh, ugh. That like the
yeah,
sense of, and just in that, because you were in that house. Oh, that's in the, okay. So I'm going to digress for a second. The house with all the things built onto it.
yeah.
Was that just in your head? Did you have sketches?
I do a very rough floor plan when I'm doing any sort of big complicated house thing. So yeah, I had a rough floor plan, but also Limpney Castle on the other side of Romney Marsh. It basically has a really it's not the same, but it's a sort of shambolic mess of a place with multiple different eras sort of stuck together. Um, so yeah, it was. I sort of vaguely use that. But yeah, no, I always do a bit of a plan just so that I don't move the billiard from around the house, which otherwise I would do. I have no spatial awareness, so it gets written down or I get it wrong, one of the two.
That makes a lot of sense. And then let's talk about Gareth and Josh a bit, and then we're gonna talk about Rufus and Luke a little bit, and then we're gonna move to audience questions. So y'all, if you have questions, throw them into the Q&A, and if you see one that you like, and you just upvote it to move it higher up the line. So one of the things that I found intriguing about Gareth and Josh was how they were physically intimate from the start, but then they had to build their emotional intimacy.
I really like that. It's a nice way to. I mean, I love doing a really slow burn where they know each other for ages, and they. Yeah, in fact, this is the two books are the opposite, really, because in Nobleman's Guide, they you're about halfway through before they actually get together, whereas in this one they're having sex on page one, pretty much.
Yeah,
Um, but I like that. I like the contrast, and I think that it's probably in historical romance that's something you do in a male male romance that just it would be unlikely to happen in a male female romance because of the cultural
right.
situation at the time. Men were having anonymous sex because they didn't have a lot of options, and so I think I did actually, you see, when I actually conceived the first book, Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen, and this is probably going to horrify everyone who's read it. So it was going to be this really brutal, vicious enemies to lovers situation. And what I had in mind, the actual inciting incident, there's the incident in the courtroom at the beginning where Joss forces Gareth to retract his testimony with the sort of, effectively his presence as a sort of unspoken blackmail. But it was going to be an awful lot more brutal than that. It was going to be horrible. It was going to be unforgivable. And then he was going to go on blackmailing Gareth. And oh no, I know it was awful. I'm really glad he didn't do that. It was. I was going. The synopsis was all horrible, edgy people. Then I started looking at it, and I was just, I don't want to write these people. They're horrible. They suck. Um, but yeah, so it's nevertheless it's a situation that gives you an instant and quite bitter conflict. And in fact, of course, once you look at Gareth and Joss, they're actually two lovely people and they get on enormously well. And despite their massive class difference and their different experiences, and if I hadn't put quite the large spanner in the works at the beginning, we wouldn't have had any conflict at all, kind of
Right.
thing. So yeah, so they couldn't really afford to have them just meet each other and fall in love. They had to have this stumbling block of sex plus blackmail plus oh my god, what's happening now situation.
Yeah. I just adored it. And the way you brought the Doomsday Clan to life.
I had fun with them. Well, they're both books about families, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
I don't plan these things a lot of the time. I write the books, and then people come to me and they go, "Oh, here is your big thematic thing," and I was like, "Is it? Oh God." I've not ever still got over my husband reading Flight of Magpies, the third in my Magpie Lord series, where the plot is all about some really horrific magical murders, and somebody literally gets cut in half. And my husband read it and went, "You've written a book about my job." And I was like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? What absolute nonsense!" And then I reread it and I was like, "Oh yeah, no, I did. Sorry." It is a book about his job. So in this case, apparently I wrote 2 books about people really struggling with their families. My family's fine. I'd just like to point that out.
Right, but at the same time, you have the Doomsday family, which is this lovely, wonderful family, except for Luke's blank blank father. Um, and then you have, but they, even though they're lovely and wonderful, they can't get it right with Luke.
They mess up. They
They
mess up
mess
bad.
up, and then you have that hideous Conrad family, and they're just on the front of it, they're horrible. But then you look at the children in that the third generation, and there are some lovely moments with them. So
Yeah,
I
no,
like that it's very, you have a lot of contrast there.
yeah, I think I believe very strongly in acknowledging when people do badly and giving them opportunities to do better. And, if people are trying to do better, then extending that. And, in the fact that we've all fundamentally got to get along together, and you can't just turn your back on someone when they make a mistake, or we'd all have our backs turned to everyone.
Right.
So, these are books really about people who are trying to hold things together or pull them back together. And that's Josh.
They absolutely are. And oh my gosh, Luke
Yeah, I
and
don't think Luke's quite
Rufus and
well.
Luke. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but I will just say Luke's handwriting.
Yeah, that's I think the thing about Luke is he does actually do a pretty rotten thing to Rufus, which is the sort of the big dark, bad moment kind of thing.
Yeah.
I needed, he's not a bad person. He's a person who is really could have used a lot of therapy, and
Right.
unfortunately, not really available for a smuggler's bastard in
And
1826.
Gareth did the best he could to provide it. And
Yeah,
Josh tried too, but no, there
you
was
know,
so much damage.
yeah, no, I mean, sometimes people are really damaged, and sometimes it's, they have to take a long time even to realize what the problem is. And, so that sort of, that was quite important to me. And also, it has occurred to me sometimes that I have put secondary characters through absolutely terrible things and then kind of left them to get on with it. And with Luke, I could not have, I couldn't just leave him there, the poor
Thank
little,
you.
you know.
Thank you. Will we see any more Doomsday Chronicles in any form?
I don't, sort of probably not immediately, because everyone is in a good place, which is my that's my sort of where I draw the line under a series, when everyone is in a good place.
I like
Um,
that.
but that said, I've been vaguely wondering about possibly, you know, possibly there might be a sort of third generation one in it. I did with my Society of Gentlemen series. That sort of ties into my Lily White Boys series, even though it's like about, I don't know, 5 decades later. Just via a great uncle kind of thing. And there may be a great nephew kind of situation that I can do something with, but I'm just gonna let that one germinate because I've got an awful lot else on at the moment.
So, on that note, can you talk about anything that's coming up?
Gosh, right. So I have got well, one thing that's coming up that's very, very fun is that Orion, publisher in the UK, they've taken my book, A Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting, which was self-published, and they've bought it to publish as their own. And then I have written a sort of vaguely linked book, not with the same character. The same characters make a cameo appearance, but it's more linked. They're going to be called. The series name is going to be Gentleman of Uncertain Fortune, which is a sort of Austen-y phrase about, you know, because they're all people who are struggling to survive. And the second book is called The Duke at Hazard, because I realised, well, I see, yeah, I know, I couldn't resist it. Well, I wanted to do a Duke book because everyone's done a Duke book except me. And yeah, obviously, we all know that there are more Dukes in fiction. There were people alive in the Regency, etc. But I kind of felt like there's only so long you can be a historical romance novelist without doing a Duke.
Absolutely.
So I thought I would, and it proved to be really fun, and I'm really happy with it. So that will be coming out next year. I'm not 100% sure. Courtney might know.
And is
But
that
yes,
with Orion, or is it coming out in the US as well?
That's with Orion, and it should be coming out in the US. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it is. But yeah, and W and E and everything. So those are the two things that are. Thank you, Courtney. I've just seen that she says she's looking for the pub dates. Yeah, so there's the new edition, and I've just seen the draft cover for Gentle Art of Fortune Hunting, and we're still working on it, but the potential is like really exciting. So I'm quietly thrilled about that, and I'm really looking forward to the due. I am genuinely happy with this. I usually panic about books, but I'm so happy with this one. So
I'm so glad.
Then there's a bit of a departure, which is that I am doing a historical mystery, like a detective novel, which is coming out with a publisher called Storm. And that is actually going to come out next February, I think. It's going to be eFirst. They're a sort of small new publisher, actually run by a friend of mine, although they didn't know that at the time when I submitted the book. But that is something I had been working on for a while, and it's much more bleak. No, is bleak the word I want? It's melancholy. Melancholy is the word I want. It's more melancholy in tone, and I'm not doing any giveaways about the content, apart from obviously there's a murder mystery. It's set in Oxford. I went to Oxford and I did not like it, and a lot of people write books to Oxford as like love letters, and this is sort of more hate mail, so it's going to be fun. Yeah, I think it was very therapeutic, but I've spent the last couple of weeks, really sort of thrashing through it and getting it sorted out, which it needed quite a lot of work. But that's going to be coming out, and I think I will be very interested to see what people think. And then after that, I have 3 more romances to come with Sourcebooks. And then I have another big project that I still can't mention because the contract has been sat there because Courtney has been working herself to the bone sorting out the AI language, which, as I'm sure you know, is a massive stumbling block for authors
It
and
is.
publishers.
It's a
real difficulty
disaster.
at the moment. So it's a pain in the bum. I had you probably noticed that this week they released the names of the 191,000 books that were stolen without any, not even, they didn't even buy one copy. They just pirated 191,000 books to stick into their sausage maker and use to train their language generators. And 7 of mine are in there. And the bad language that has been generated by this, I'm absolutely livid. But yeah, so the whole AI thing is very difficult on contracts at the moment, and it's taking a long time to work through that. That having been worked through, I will have a big, exciting announcement to make, but I just can't do that until we've done the contract.
Oh, absolutely. So. But I'm just so glad to know that there are so many more books and stories coming from you wherever they're being based and in whatever format they are, because your work brings a lot of joy.
Well, I am now contracted, or I will be contracted up to the end of 2026.
Congratulations. Yes. That is no small feat.
You say that. I'm sat there going, I'm signed up to 2026. Am I insane?
No, you can do it. I mean, and I don't mean to be, I'm not being cavalier, but I have faith that you can make this work.
I am sure I can make it work. It's just going to be, there are
going to be some weeks where it's not going to be great.
Yeah, well, I'm mostly on Blue Sky now, and if you want to see me swearing and panicking, you can do that.
I bet. I want to turn to some audience questions.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Here is one from Claire, who's curious to know if your writing process is different for your traditionally published books compared to your other work.
Not really, no. In large part because I used to be an editor, so whatever. Yeah, I don't send anything to an editor until I'm really happy with it, which means it goes through my trusted readers and I go over it, and I've done a lot of work on it. And I will share that the Orion editor who did The Duke of Hazzard said it was literally the cleanest manuscript she'd ever worked on. Well, because I'm an editor, so
Right.
I don't want, my husband takes the mickey out of me for this because he's like, no, the editor is supposed to clean up the book. That's what you used to do. And I'm like, you can just send it in and they'll clean it up. And I was like, I cannot do that. I am basically the person who's doing all the cleaning of the house before the cleaner comes around. But.
Yeah, I get it. Marta says, we had a really interesting conversation on the KJ Facebook page about the names you chose for characters, especially the Gothic noble family. Can you tell us more about how you chose those names and why?
Oh, yes, I had a lot of fun with those. So, the background here is that the Domesday family are obsessed with their Norman heritage. It's a big thing in Romney Marsh. It's basically the biggest thing that's ever happened there, which is that was basically where they invaded England. Not been a lot happened there since, but that was so they invaded, and the Domesday family settled in Romney Marsh, just up the road from the invasion site, and have been there ever since. So all of the names had to be from the Norman or post-Norman period, and the next dynasty was the Angevins, and then it was the Plantagenets. So I allowed myself that much sort of scope. I also, during lockdown, for reasons that I can't even begin to explain, I went through this mad period of just reading Angevin history. Like, I read 7 Angevin histories, going through these really deep dives. It wasn't for a reason. I'm never going to write a romance. I just felt compelled to read 7 books of Angevin history. So I had the names to hand, is what I'm saying here. So yes, I had to swap some of them around. Rufus is obviously the name of William Rufus, who was the Conqueror's son. Rufus is actually a nickname; it's not a proper name. It means red because he was red-haired, but he was the heir who was murdered. The unwanted heir who was like got out of the way with his brother. So there's a
Yep.
kind of element of threat there, and the unwanted heir quality of it is obviously because that's what Rufus is. There is Berengaria is, I'm not even sure how you pronounce that one, but Berengaria is just a ridiculous name, and having come across it as the wife of Richard the Lionheart, I could not resist it because it's such an awful name to saddle anyone with. And Odo as well, who was the brother of William the Conqueror. And then the sort of villains of the piece, there's Conrad and Matilda. And of course, Matilda, was the anarchy. Stephen and Matilda were fighting for the crown of England. Basically, there was this huge civil war. So, and this entire book is about Conrad and Matilda trying to fight Rufus for the earldom. So obviously, Matilda was the only possible name I could have for
Right.
that. There's who else is there? Oh yes, the other one actually was a sort of moment of credit. The elderly and demented uncle, Pagan. Partly, it's just insane that anyone could be called Pagan, but some people were, and how could I resist? Partly, he is in fact a pagan, and partly, I actually was inspired to, or partially inspired to write both books because I came up with the idea of having the two families, the Doomsdays and the Domesdays, who were related back in like the 14th century, and
Right.
then the names diverged. Because if you're called Domesday, local people would just turn that into Doomsday. But that's basically the inciting incident of Tess of the D'Urbervilles. She's Tess Derbyfield, and the vicar says, "Oh, you're actually a D'Urberville," and she gets ideas above her station, and everything goes horribly wrong for her. So, and the D'Urberville ancestor is called Pagan. So I just thought, okay, I have to have a character called Pagan now. It's absolutely compulsory. These things just satisfy me when I'm doing
I
a bit
love
of it.
that. No, but I also I love that you're putting things in there that just are so satisfying to you and, give us a whole nother layer
They
of,
are, I mean, some of them are purely personal satisfaction. Like
right.
Walleran is just literally. I come from a town in the UK that has absolutely no like the Romney Marsh thing. It has no distinguishing features apart from something that happened in 1066. So I've got a Motte and Bailey Castle in the town where I come from, and its big defender who saved it was called Walleran. So I basically had to name a character after the big defender of Berkhamsted Castle just because,
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I love that. And on the note of Rufus, which reminded me, after we spent time in Rye, we went to Hastings on the way back up to London to fly home. And my my husband who plays Dungeons and Dragons was beside himself with joy.
yeah, excellent.
Highly
Just like
recommend that spot. Helen Wood says, I loved Berengaria. Did you have a visual reference for her art?
Do you know what? I do, but it's completely ahistorical because my aunt, actually, as it happens, is she has a society called the Society for Art of Imagination, and she's an amazing painter. And her name is Bridget Marlin. And she has, it's not all of her paintings, but some of her paintings do this extraordinary thing where you just have what seems like a normal scene and then something is just pulled out and weird. And I can imagine her painting that, especially Luke's painting, the one that gets talked about, where it's a scene of Romney Marsh, but the rainbows are basically kind of surrealist almost. The rainbows are everywhere,
Right.
and it's something that my aunt could paint because she's got this astonishing imagination, this very luminous way of painting. So to be honest, I wasn't going for a specific historical reference because once I thought about, all I could think about is how my aunt would do it. Yeah, she is a she's I have several professional artists in my family, which makes it extraordinary that I can't even draw a stick man. But
You paint pictures with words,
well, that's what I tell myself.
but you do. Heck, you write books that inspire people to get on a plane and go on vacation.
Well, there is that. I will take that. So yes, I could. I vaguely thought of asking her if she would consider, you know, putting that image on paper for me because I can see in my mind's eye how she would paint it, kind of thing.
Oh,
But
that's
it's very hard
amazing.
to know it. Yeah.
That is really, really wonderful. I want to give you time to enjoy the rest of your rugby night. So I'm going to wrap with one final question and then do a little bit of housekeeping on the way out. We always ask authors, or we often ask authors to tell us a book of their heart. And that can mean something that has been a book that's been very special to you for years, or something that you've recently read and that really engrossed you. Do you have one?
I do. I have many, many books of my heart, but so I thought I'd just pick something I read recently that blew my socks off, which is The Survivalists by Kashana Corley. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce the name, but basically it's about survivalists, the crazy people who stockpile guns and think that the world's going to end. But in fact, it's focusing on this black lawyer in New York who comes across a group of black survivalists, which is obviously quite unusual because they are mostly white people, as I understand it. And it really, obviously, it's about survival. It's about the fact that people are deracinated and separated and sort of driven to bizarre extremes to keep on going. She's the heroinist trying to survive in this law firm, and it's about a lot of people on the brink. And it's really very, very funny in a very dark way, and it's intense satire as well. And I just thought it was absolutely tremendous. It's completely engrossing as a story, and it's completely engrossing as a satire, and it's completely engrossing just on so many levels. I thought it was wonderful. So I think everyone should read that. And the other thing that I'm going to mention, excuse me, because it comes out next week, uh, is a book called The Gin Bot of Shantiport by Samit Basu. Um, which I got to have an ARC of because I'm a jammy cow. This is one of the big advantages of being an author, is you get the ARCs of the good stuff. It's so good. It's just this. Samit Basu writes these science fiction novels where you just, if you think you know what's going to happen, you're just wrong. The plot just careers around corners and up walls, and it's like, you know, Wile E. Coyote has created this plot, and they just romp about, but they're also very heartfelt and very moving and very intense. And he's just throwing all these ideas, and it's got a gorgeous cover. So yeah, you should also read the Gin Bottle Shantyport, and that is coming out next week. So get in.
Excellent. Thank you. Maggie, we're going to get all that information to you in an email, so just be patient, please. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. KJ, thanks for taking time to chat with me. I love your book so much, and I'm so glad that Sourcebooks made it possible for us to have a conversation. I will say to everybody, remind you that if you buy a book from Blue Willow, you're helping sustain our event programming. So, and I'm going to be extra nice because KJ and Sourcebooks were extra nice. If you order one or the other, I'll throw in both book plates. Actually, my colleagues will throw in the book plates, and I'll remind them to do so. So please be sure to order if you need a lovely book. And if you want to give a present as a book as a lovely present, do that too. But thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful to you, everybody, for your support. And KJ, thank you so much for your work. It makes us so happy. All right. Have a good night, everybody. Bye, y'all.
Okay. See ya.